Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining us again today. When it comes to polymer compact .380 handguns, there's not a whole lot that I'll carry. Right now, the Glock 42 has been about the only thing that I'll put in my pocket until Smith & Wesson released the Bodyguard 2.0. Thinner, lighter, better capacity, and it shoots really well to boot. I'm going to tell you all about it in just a minute. Alright, once again, thanks for being with us today. If this is your first time coming to the channel, or if you've watched our videos before and just have not had a chance until now and you like our content, please consider subscribing. You can locate that subscribe button in the lower right hand corner of your computer screen there, or you can scroll down below the video from a mobile device and you can hit subscribe that way. It's a simple thing that helps out a whole lot and we really appreciate it. So, the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 2.0. I remember the original Bodyguard, and it was a decent gun, but obviously we're always looking to improve, make things better, get better capacity, and so on. And as I said, up until this point, the Glock 42 is really the only polymer .380 that I would carry, which I happen to have right here. And of course, we always like to start off with a little size comparison, and I think it's important that you see this, because most people that I know that have a Glock 42, the main reason they got it is because it's so small. I've got many other good concealable handguns and many other calibers. I didn't really care too much about .380, but when I saw the Glock 42 and it came out and I saw how small it was, I was really impressed. And it's comfortable. It fits my hand well. I've always liked it. And then you look at something like the Bodyguard and you see just how much smaller they've managed to make it, and still make it a gun that you can actually handle. Now let's take a look at a couple other things. You can see the obvious difference in the length and the overall height, etc. If you want to get down to the actual business of it, the Glock is almost 6 inches long, 5.94. The Smith is around 5.5 inches long. As far as the width, the Glock is a little bit wider. It's like 0.98 inches versus 0.88. And then the actual height, you're looking at 4.13 on the Glock and 4 inches on the Smith. So it's definitely a little bit smaller. And you can see that when you look at overhead here, you can see just how much thinner the Smith is. And then looking at it as far as the height from the sights down to the bottom of the mag. And of course, keep in mind, you do have two different mags for the Smith, which we'll talk about in the features, but with the extended mag, you get the overall height a little closer to the 42. The other big difference is the weight. The Glock 42 unloaded is almost 14 ounces. The Smith is just a hair, it's around 9.8 ounces. That's a big difference between the two. Now, granted, you have higher capacity, either 10+1 or 12+1 versus 6+1. So obviously that weight can be traded off. But still, you have to acknowledge what a lighter and smaller platform that they've managed to put together here. And with its other features, looks like it could be a very good contender for a concealed carry handgun. Well, speaking of features, we're going to jump right in here. But before we do, of course, we're going to take just a moment to thank our friends over at Don's Weaponry for providing us this beautiful example of the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 2.0 for our tabletop review today. Don's Weaponry is a huge supporter of firearms safety and education, and we can't thank them enough. So as usual, we are going to move our magazine here, and we will demonstrate that the firearm is safe before we continue to talk here. And since we got the magazine out, we'll start there. I mentioned it has two magazines. You got your flush magazine here, which is 10 rounds, and I mentioned of course, with the Glock 42, that's a 6-round magazine. So even if you use the flush magazine, you got better capacity. For some people, capacity is a primary concern. It doesn't concern me as much, but if I can have a smaller handgun that's functional and have more capacity, well, that's a win all the way around. So with this magazine in place, I feel like I've got a pretty good grip on the gun. Even with just 2 fingers, you've got this contour front of the grip, and I feel like it is a good solid feel, the texture and everything. I believe it's a really good setup. Now, if you want to up that even greater, when you put the 12-round magazine in, you have a full grip. I mean, you really do. I've got pretty big fingers, and I can hold this just as easy as I can a regular compact size handgun. And of course, that's going to make it a little bit bigger, so that may change your decision whether you're going to pocket carry or whether it's going to be in a holster. For me, just this little bit extra is probably going to be more than I'll want to stick in my pocket. If I'm down to this, it's going to be easy to pocket holster, and we'll cover that when I talk about the holster section. But either way is a great setup. So going over the features, we'll top down here. We always like to start here with the sights, and you can see there's a nice fixed rear sight and high visibility front sight. If you've watched my videos before, you've heard me say this is kind of my minimum expectation out of a handgun. If you're a major handgun manufacturer and you're making the handgun for the concealed carry market, if you can at least give me a high visibility front sight that I can, quickly acquire a target with, I'm kind of disappointed. So I'm glad to see this. Springfield's doing a good job with this too, and so I'm glad to see people are getting on board with that. Pretty good serrations on the slide here, front and rear. It's a small slide, so they've done a pretty good job with that, I think. And speaking of slides, if you want to remove that for your cleaning, your takedown lever is right there. It's pretty simple. You just lock the slide back here, rotate the lever down, of course, and you can slide the entire thing forward. You can remove your spring and your rod at that point and then tip out your barrel and do your basic cleaning. Obviously, if you've got to go beyond that, tearing it down, if you're not an armorer, you probably should take it to someone who is. But that'll allow you to do your basic cleanup on the firearm. And of course, your slide lock and release is right here. And this model does have a manual safety. So you've got a couple of versions of this. This one has the safety, and of course they sell it without it as well. It doesn't really matter to me. Typically, if I'm specifically ordering a handgun, I usually won't get a manual safety. Now, some guns are going to have one no matter what. I buy certain SIGs and HKs that have a safety decocker built in, and that's fine because I'm not going to place the safety on. But I think for a small gun like this that you're going to pocket carry, for a lot of people, that manual safety may not be a bad thing. So I'm okay with it. And trigger guard, it's a little small for my big fingers. That's the only thing, if I'm going to have any criticism whatsoever, it's going to be that small trigger guard. Now, most people are probably going to be fine. They don't have probably as long, big of fingers. But even if they don't, by the time you index that trigger guard, it is kind of a small space that you're getting into. So just keep that in mind. And yes, obviously that's part of the, part of the breaks when it comes to carrying a small gun is you're going to have smaller features on the gun. But the trigger, they've gone to a flat face trigger here, and of course they've got that little trigger safety built into the front. I've had some people consider, talking about that, about it being a little flimsy, they think, have concerns about it. I don't know. It doesn't feel that bad to me. I've seen this on other trigger setups, and it seems to hold up okay. But we'll see how it does over time. It doesn't bother me. Now, the trigger itself, we'll get into more of this in the range section, but the trigger, I think it's pretty decent. I'll cover that in more detail. You've got the magazine release right here. I think it's easy to get to. It's positioned well. It's what I call protected. They have a little rise right in here. So if you have your thumb on top of the magazine release, it's going to be kind of hard for you to accidentally release the magazine. You got to really move your thumb over to the side to make it come out. So that's a good design with that little rise they put right in there. I like the grip texturing all the way around. I think it feels pretty good. And like I say, overall, it feels good in your hand regardless of which magazine you have in. It's got good features. It even addresses the concerns that people may have about wanting that manual safety, so you can get either way. So it's not a bad package. All right, so we know it's a small gun, so obviously the concern is going to be, well, how does it shoot? So I like to make comparisons between things that I think work well. And so we use the Glock here as a comparison. Now, this little Glock 42, I can't tell you how many rounds I've got a couple of these, but this one I've really shot a lot. And I feel like that it's a pretty good shooting gun. But I can also tell you that if I've put a few magazines through this, I can start to feel it in my hand after a while. And it's a pretty good size frame. Now, obviously, if you're practicing, that's a different world than if you're just using the firearm for a short duration, say in a self-defense situation or something like that, versus shooting 50 rounds through it for practice. We all get that. I'm just saying that I can tell when I've been shooting this little gun for a while. You can start to feel it in your hand. So, how does the Bodyguard compare? Well, it's actually pretty good, and I think one thing that helps with this one is the grip. You know, you've got this contoured grip on the Smith, and I feel like that versus the Glock, my fingers kind of feel like they're a little more at home with the Smith. When I've shot this one for the same length of time, I don't know, they're close, but I don't think this one's quite as bad as far as what I feel, as far as the energy in my hand. So it's not a bad gun to shoot, and it actually shoots pretty well. Now, obviously, it's a relatively short barrel 380, so we're not talking about precision shooting at 100 yards here. We're talking about if I'm shooting about 21 feet defensive, distance, I can make some pretty decent holes in paper at a range that I am satisfied with for defensive purposes. It's not real picky about ammo. I gave it a few different choices here. Critical defense, this is a 90 grain. Of course, I'm always big on trying to put some hydroshocks through a gun. I feel like it's a pretty good round. And then, of course, I've got some of the Remington Ultimate Defense. This is 102 grain. Now, all of these seem to do fine. I didn't really notice a difference. A lot of times I'll see an improvement in performance between one round or another. That wasn't really the case here. They're all about the same. Like I said, this is not a gun that I'm going to get a lot of precision shooting out of, but I can produce pretty decent groups no matter which cartridge I've got in the handgun. So it's got a nice little trigger. I'm going to show you that. So once again, I showed you that you've got your little trigger safety there, and then once you get into the trigger, it's a very small but distinct crack. And then I'm going to reset the trigger. It's not a short reset. Then you're right back into that little wall, and then it's a nice little break. So for a small gun, it has a pretty crisp little trigger. It's it's pretty easy to get used to. But just keep in mind, it's got not a super long reset, but it's definitely not a short reset trigger. So when you go to shoot it, it'll take a little getting used to, because you're going to be coming out a pretty good little ways before the trigger resets. It definitely doesn't slow down my shooting at all, but if you're used to shooting something with a much shorter trigger reset, you'll see what I'm talking about. But overall, it's a very good shooting little gun. It's not picky about ammo, and it seems to be a reliable platform at this point. Well, there's many things we always talk about when it comes to these concealed carry firearms. For me, one of the biggest priorities is always going to be this section right here, and that is, what's it like to carry it? What are our options? How comfortable is it? Because I hear people say all kinds of things about how fancy their guns are and what they put on them, and I never see them carry them because their guns become ridiculously too large and bulky for everyday carry. I end up in a pocket carry situation a lot just because it works for me, and I've been doing it for a long time. The Glock 42, I've pocket carried this gun a lot. It's just on the kind of the top end of size that I'll do that with, because it's It's tall enough. If it was too much bigger than it is right now, it'd be, kind of stuffing it into my pocket. So this is no problem at all. A couple different options that I've tried. DeSantis makes the little gun hide here. I like these little holsters. This little guy right here, the way it's designed, you've got this little piece that will help it stay in position in your pocket. So when you put it down your pocket like this, it's not going to roll around, end up sideways. It stays upright. So you can draw out of the holster. And since this is pretty solid, you can get it back in the holster without a lot of complications. So this is kind of one of my favorites. Obviously, if you don't want to do something like that, a lot of people like the stickies. I like those too, because you can simply put the gun inside your sticky holster there. Once again, when it goes in your pocket, this will go up against the material. It's called sticky for a reason. It kind of stays in place. And you can just draw straight from your pocket. The only difference with the stickies is if you remove the firearm from the sticky, you're probably going to have to pull this out of your pocket and then put it back in before you put it back in your pocket. I don't really have good luck trying to reholster that in the pocket, but it's still very easy to do. So you got a few different options, and of course there's many, many more. You might even opt to, holster this and use something that's either in the waistband or otherwise, and you could do that too. But for me, when I see a gun like this, I'm thinking pocket carry, and it does that very, very well, and it's very, very light. Overall impressions of the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 2.0. I think it's a good gun overall. There's a couple things I'd change if I could, but I don't know if they really could without changing the whole design of the gun. And that's the trigger guard. That's the only thing I wish was a little bit bigger. Is that a deal breaker for me? No, not at all. This is a really good, very comfortable, good shooting gun. I don't think it's going to take a whole lot for me to, get used to just indexing that a little bit differently so I can get inside the trigger guard there. So I like the capacity. I like the fact that it will carry more rounds than my .42. It's a little bit slimmer. It's a bit lighter. And it's a good shooting gun. It has a decent trigger. And of course, over time, we'll see how this little trigger safety holds up and how the firearm holds up overall. But so far, it seems to be a good little gun that's not really fazed by what kind of ammunition that you put in it. And it's got pretty decent accuracy. So I think Smith got it right with this little gun. The MSRP on this is $449. For me personally, I'm going to say that's not bad. If you've looked at gun prices lately, all the way around for different sizes, a lot of your micro compacts cost you a lot more than that. So 10+1 and an optional 12+1 capacity with the other magazine, I think you're getting a pretty good value for your money as far as firearms go, especially something that's small with good features. And of course, for some people, that's going to be more than what they're willing to put out. And I get that. But for me, I think that this is worth, if you were considering something that's a little less expensive, I think it's worth saving a little bit more and getting into something like this, because I think they've got a good package here. I think Smith has got a winner. We'll see what happens over time. But I think for the price, it's got good features. It seems to be a good shooter. And man, it is easy to carry. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. As always, we thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back soon with another video for you. So as always, everybody please stay safe and have a great day. Thank you.